No. Dan Hirsch is a lecturer in nuclear policy at UC Santa Cruz. He's president of the Committee to Bridge the Gap, and it was his students at UCLA that discovered the nuclear accident that took place at Santa Susana Field Lab 20 years after it happened and had been completely covered up. So he's one of the heroes, one of the most knowledgeable people in this area, especially about California. Please welcome Dan Hirsch.
A few hundred yards in back of me, in that first dome, resides approximately 1,000 times the long-lived radioactivity of the Hiroshima bomb. Behind it, in that second dome, is another 1,000 times the long-lived radioactivity of the Hiroshima bomb. And in the two spent fuel pools, the pools in which the irradiated fuel is put after it's taken out of the reactors, there's another 10,000 times the long-lived radioactivity of Hiroshima. All told, a few hundred yards from us right now, there's about 20 times as much long-lived radioactivity as was released by the Chernobyl accident 26 years ago, and greatly more than was released in the Fukushima accident. To put that in perspective for you, the amount of radioactivity a few hundred yards from us, just in one of those reactors, was estimated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission 30 years ago to be capable, if it were released in an accident, of causing 130,000 immediate deaths of the sort that occurred in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, 300,000 cancers, and 600,000 genetic effects for about 1 million casualties were there an accident in just one of those domes in back of me. And that is before the population of Southern California got much larger, and before we learned that radiation is even more dangerous than was assumed back in 1980. So why does that matter? It obviously matters because if there were an accident, you could lose most of Southern California. So the question is, can we have an accident? Or is that facility a few hundred yards from us so well run that you simply have nothing to worry about? So I want to give you one particularly remarkable number. Southern California Edison is number one. It was number one last year, it was number one the previous year, and it was number one the year before in safety complaints. Here are the numbers. Last year, the number of substantiated and unsubstantiated complaints was 6 times the national average. But they were even better the year before. 2010, they were 15 times the national average for safety complaints. They had 300 allegations of safety problems in the past 4 years, 33 of discrimination against workers who brought safety concerns forward, 63 substantiated allegations. And just to show you how good they are, their number of safety complaints was 118 higher than the number 2 plant in the country. They're not only number one, but they're number one by a large margin. So why does that matter? Well, let me give you a couple of examples of the safety problems that have occurred at this facility, a few hundred yards from us. It was discovered a few years ago that for a period of 5 years, hourly fire watches designed to make sure there wasn't a fire that could cause the loss of control and therefore the loss of cooling and a meltdown. For 5 years, the fire watches on this shift had not been done. And they had fabricated the log. Rather than doing the fire watches, they just wrote a note saying we did it when we didn't. Not only did that go on for 5 years, not only did they fabricate the logs, but Edison never discovered it, never stopped it. And when it was finally discovered, do you know what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission did? Nothing. They entered into an alternative dispute resolution process with Edison. There was no dispute, they had violated the rules. And they let Edison get off without a penalty, a fine, a violation. Instead, Edison simply said that they would put in place sensitivity training program to increase the awareness of workers of the importance of following rules. Let me give you another example. Again, a few hundred yards behind me, for 4 years, the batteries for the backup diesel generators were not properly connected. 4 years. And you all know from Fukushima how important it is to have backup diesel generators. When you lose off-site power, you see those power lines back here. When you lose the power coming into the reactor, it cannot run the pumps to cool the fuel to prevent it from melting and releasing its radioactivity. You need to have backup diesel generators, and that's what failed at Fukushima. But for 4 years, the batteries weren't connected. They've had other troubles with their backup diesel generators as well. Here's one number that really scares me. 25% of the workers at San Onofre, according to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, feel frightened to bring safety complaints forward to their management because they're worried they'll be demoted or fired if they do so. Now, we're not talking about a McDonald's hamburger joint where there may be a safety problem about mopping floors. We're talking about a facility that has in it, when it runs, 15 billion curies of radioactivity. To put that in perspective, we measure permissible concentrations in the environment in picocuries. That's millionths of a millionth of a curie. And when the reactors are running, there are 15 billion curies. We could lose much of California if a worker was too frightened to bring forward a safety complaint, if there were large numbers of safety problems not fixed, if for years they ran, as they have, in violation of the fire safety rules. For decades, San Onofre was supposed to fix the problems with the fire risks at the site. And for years, they requested extensions. They requested delays. They requested waivers. As recently as March of last year, the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, gave them another extension and another vacation from compliance with the fire safety rules. And if there were a fire that took out both their primary and their secondary wiring, they would be unable to control the reactor, unable to prevent the fuel from melting and releasing that vast quantity of radioactivity into the second most populated zone in the country within 50 miles of a reactor. There are 8.5 million people within 50 miles of where we stand. And you all know that during the Fukushima accident, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission recommended that Americans in Japan evacuate out 50 miles. Do you know how far they require an evacuation from this facility? 10 miles. But you also know that evacuation's a fiction. We all know what the freeways are like in Southern California during the best of times. I sat through the emergency planning hearings for San Onofre, and there they had this fiction that essentially every square foot of freeway would be filled with every square foot of car. There would be no overheating, no accidents, no people racing to go to try to pick up kids, to try to get potassium iodide tablets to protect their thyroids and so on. We can't evacuate Southern California in case of an accident. There's no way to be able to protect yourself except prevention. So let me tell you for a moment about the current fiasco that's occurring a few hundred yards from here. When they built that reactor, they said it had a design life eventually of 40 years. That's what its current license is for. And they said that the steam generators would last for those 40 years. Steam generators are extraordinarily important parts of a reactor. They are designed to be the primary coolant barrier. That primary coolant is the very radioactive water that cools the reactor core, the highly irradiated fuel. And the steam generator tubes do two things. One is they keep that highly radioactive water inside, so it doesn't get into the environment. And secondly, they prevent that coolant from being lost, because if you lose that coolant, the fuel can melt, and you can have a meltdown. So a couple months ago, a tube in the Unit 3, the one that's closest to us, burst. And Edison said, don't worry, there was no release of radioactivity. Nothing to worry about. The following day, the Nuclear Regulatory said, yes, there was a release of radioactivity. And by the way, Unit 2 is having a lot of troubles too. Unit 2 had been down for maintenance, and they had discovered, as of that point, the following amazing numbers. That two of the tubes in Unit 2 had 30% of their thickness already lost, thinned. The steam generators, which were the replacement steam generators, had been put in only 22 months earlier, had run for only 22 months, and had already lost 30% of the thickness for two of the tubes, 20% for 69, and more than 800 of the tubes had 10 to 20% of the thickness. That is in one of the two steam generators in the Unit 3 behind me. And in Unit 2, they burst the tube. Now, I've given you some numbers. The reason for that is I want you to get one number from Edison. And those of you who are in the press, I challenge you to extract this number from Edison. How many damaged tubes have they now found? Remember, in early February, in only one of the four steam generators, and they'd only inspected 80% of it, there were about 900 tubes already damaged. That's 12% of the tubes they had looked at. They are not permitted to run at full power with more than 7 or 8% of the tubes plugged. So this is the dog that hasn't barked. This is the number they don't want to give you. They keep focusing on how many are so severely damaged that they've had to plug them now. But if the numbers they reported in early February have continued, that reactor can't keep running for any significant period of time. If in 1 or 2 years they have lost, damaged 12% of the tubes, starting up again and running for another year or 2 or 3 will mean that they have exceeded that plugging limit. And what worries me is that Edison, remember that record I just gave you, #1 in the country for safety complaints, 5 years of fabricating fire watch logs, 4 years of not having the batteries connected to the backup diesel generators, a company that NRC says has a problem with its safety culture, a company that NRC says has been willfully violating safety regulations, not just accidentally, but willfully, and a company that has created a chilling effect on its workers so that they're too frightened to bring forth safety concerns. My fear is that that company is going to push to restart one or both of those reactors, even though it is unsafe to do so. I want to read you the most amazing quotation I have read in years, and that is from an Edison official named Mr. Dietrich in a telephone interview he did with a number of reporters. And here's what he said: "Here, in the next few months, there is a probability greater than 50% that we'll be able to convince ourselves of that reasonable assurance of safety that we need in order to restart the reactors. A greater than 50% chance that he'll be able to convince himself Not a 99% chance that it's safe, not a 99.99% chance that it's safe for you, but a 50% chance he'll be able to convince himself and his company that there's a reasonable assurance they can safely restart. And that is my fear. They are losing $1 million a day to have to purchase replacement power. They have a tremendous financial incentive to be able to get those reactors back online. And they have a completely asleep at the switch regulator that has never turned down a license in a contested reactor case, that in fact permitted Edison, when they put in those new steam generators a few years ago, to tell NRC, you don't need to do any safety review because we're replacing these old steam generators with essentially identical new ones. And then Edison, in January, published an article boasting about having gotten the NRC to agree that this was identical, and then laying out all of the significant changes they'd actually made to the steam generators. So they were able to get the NRC to not even do the review that's required by claiming it was a like-for-like change, when in fact they made very significant changes that apparently something that in the new steam generators is obviously causing them to fall apart, not in 30 years, not in 40 years, but in 1 year. Steam generators in Unit 2 have been in place for 1 year, and they are falling apart. So here's the risk to Southern California, that Edison, with this safety culture problem, with this history of being #1 for safety problems in the country, and a regulator that is probably the most captured regulatory agency in the country, meaning captured by the industry it is to regulate, that regulator will say, fine, and they will start up without really knowing what the problem is, without having fixed the problem. And we'll have more steam generator tubes rupturing. We'll have the risk that will propagate to other steam generator tubes. And you have all of the associated problems. If there were an earthquake, you want those steam generators to be strong. But many of those tubes are damaged already. They're weaker than they were supposed to be. If there were an earthquake, you would want to make sure that there was appropriate protection against fire, because if the quake triggers a fire, you can't control the reactor and the reactor can melt. But for decades, they failed to comply with the fire safety rules, telling the NRC, don't worry, we'll check every hour in case there's a fire. But for 5 years, they didn't check. And when the NRC discovered that, the NRC said, okay. So we have an immense risk. If we were, however, not standing a few hundred yards from 10,000 times the long-lived radioactivity of Hiroshima, but if we were standing instead next to a windmill array, or a photovoltaic array, or if we were getting our power from solar thermal facilities just a bit inland, none of us would be here. An earthquake couldn't cause any trouble. A terrorist couldn't cause any trouble. A company that's not concerned about safety couldn't cause any great harm. Because if a photovoltaic array stops functioning, no one dies. If that place stops functioning, if the cooling stops, if the control wires burn, if the diesel generators fail, if the steam generators propagate a series of bursts, we can lose much of Southern California. We can lose hundreds of thousands of people. So this is simply not abstract. Let me end, if I may, with one story. Some of you may have heard me tell it to you before. It's a story that the late anthropologist Ashley Montague used to like to tell. It was about an ape that escaped from the New York Public Zoo. They looked everywhere for it, his keepers, throughout the zoo, and couldn't find it. So they eventually searched all throughout New York City and eventually found the ape in the basement of the New York Public Library. with a book in each hand, in the stacks. In one hand was the Holy Bible. In the other hand was Darwin's Origin of Species. The people from the zoo asked the ape, "What are you doing here? We've searched all over for you. What are you doing in the basement of the New York Public Library with a copy of the Holy Scripture and of Origin of Species?" And the ape said, "I'm trying to figure out if I am my brother's keeper or my keeper's brother." That ape is a lot smarter than the rest of us. That ape knows that he is connected to all life and is the brother and sister of all. That is the lesson that we have to learn, that it is one environment and that our actions affect others. And so I urge you to be vigilant, to be diligent, to try to get our governor, who once opposed the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant but has been silent about this new threat to all of you from San Onofre, to act in concert so that we can bridge the gap, if you'll pardon the expression, between the reliance on that unsafe nuclear energy in back of us to a world that relies on safe, sustainable, and clean solar energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan Hirsch. During the performance that's going to go now, we're going to have representatives going around with pillowcases to accept donations. These donations are for the Peace Resource Center, the Citizens Oversight Project, and residents organized for a safe environment that will help support demonstrations like this in the future. If you want to make out a check, you can do that to the Peace Resource Center, and it is tax deductible. And now we're going to have yeah, Acapella is going to perform for us. Take it away, ladies.
Lemon tree, oh so pretty, and the lemon flower is sweet, but the fruit of the lemon is impossible to eat. San Onofre, it's a lemon, and its poison is no treat. Breakdowns are common, nuclear power obsolete. We don't need nuclear power, and its presence we resent as we wait hour by hour for another accident. Testing nuclear power is something to dismay. Remember Fukushima when molten on this day, to show us all atomic power can really go astray. There are tidings of sorrow and fear, sorrow and fear. There are tidings of sorrow and fear. Built on faults and coastal lines so we can live so well. But earthquake and tsunami create a living hell. We cannot take such chances shown and pleasantly here dwell. There are tidings of sorrow and fear, sorrow and fear. There are tidings of sorrow and fear. We don't want a power plant full of radiation. We want other energy, such as power from the sun. So whatever can we do? Demand a change in policy. Find alternative energy that would bring us back to no, 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 no. We don't want an accident like what happened in Japan. Leaks, explosions will occur. San Onofre we should ban. So whatever can we do? Demand a change in policy. Demand the plants be all shut down. Get the power back to you.
Thank you, Acapella. Want to remind you that there are opportunities for activism at the booth back there. There is a letter you can sign that we are going to be sending in bulk to Jerry Brown, our governor. There's also a postcard that you can color in or fill out, and will also be sent in bulk to decision makers. So please check that out if you could possibly. And now we're going to hear from Darren McClure, who is the head of Onofre.com, talking with us about radiation monitoring, why it's so important, and what you can do.
Hi, my name's Darren McClure, and I'm tweeting this, so everybody smile and wave. Get the message out. You know, Arab Spring happened because of social media, so get out in your networks. I live 2 miles north of the San Onofre nuclear waste generating station. A group of us, including Gene Stone, came and asked the City Council to please set up a real-time radiation monitor for people to go to see what's going on, what's being put out from this plant. In the year 2010, they had 44 hours of atmospheric releases. That comes out to about 7 minutes a day. They also had 500 hours of oceanic releases. That comes out to about an hour and a half a day. So I don't know how many people even know that. For this to be working, it has to be leaking. So I want to invite all of you to go to Onofre.com and sign up and get your little iPhones and things out, and to buy an IRAD Geiger radiation detector for $300 and connect in a big hive so that we're all publishing this information to SafeCast. Because without the what is not measured is not managed, folks. If we're not all getting together and wagging the dog will keep farting. So again, in the end, aging nuke plants in tsunami hazard zones, on earthquake faults, what do they cause? It's Fukushimas. Thank you.
Yeah, we would really like people to join the radiation monitoring team to let you know that half of the monitoring systems that are set up only come online after an accident. The other half that are online are not online so that you can see them. They're monitoring, and some people are checking them once a month, but you can only read about it a year later. So the reason we need a volunteer monitoring system is so that we can know what's happening now. So please join with us. Okay. Torgan Johnson will be our next speaker from Solana Beach. Please welcome Torgan.
It's encouraging to see this microphone here. At least there's a little bit of media still here right now, because my talk was meant for the media to hear, and I don't see many of them left here anymore. The reason why is I think that this fight needs to be expanded beyond this group of aware individuals to include a group out there that is probably not hearing this. Rarely is it discussed that the immediate devastation of nuclear disasters is conversion of the built environment, that's everything that we create and live in, and the land on which it is built, into worthless exclusion zones. Even in the extreme destruction of war, land is not reduced to zero value unless it is radioactively contaminated. Arguably, the most evil human to walk the earth, Adolf Hitler, realized the value of the built environment, and he chose not to bomb Paris. Instead, he protected it for his future occupation and enjoyment. Southern California Edison does not even have the appreciation for protecting society's greatest achievement, the built environment, that history's most despised monster had. What does that say about the wisdom and priorities of Edison's upper management? Society anchors much of its wealth in land and the built environment. Wall Street, through its nefarious and unregulated use of derivatives, leveraged the real assets of land and land improvements to create the largest economic bubble the world had ever seen. That bubble was anchored in a real asset, land. That is to say that our private and public wealth is to a large extent manifest in the property, the homes, the office buildings, the hotels, the theme parks, the infrastructure, the streets and freeways, the transit systems, the container ports, the universities, the research facilities, the hospitals, the schools, the churches, the temples, the daycare facilities, etc., etc., etc. The list goes on and on. With that in mind, now consider that there is a facility behind us operating a technology that is so dangerous that it can, in a matter of minutes or hours, wipe clean the generations of hard work and the trillions, with a T, trillions of dollars that went into creating the built environment here in Southern California that houses society's necessary functions. It does this by making the built environment unlivable in those areas heavily contaminated by radioactive fallout. It erases society in a way never seen before. It's irreversible destruction of wealth, our social fabric, future potential as a society, and human health. As a Harvard-trained planner, I have never seen anything like it before. It absolutely frightens me. Ironically, in the United States, the top 20% of our society owns about 84% of the wealth, and a large portion of that is in the land, the structures, and the loans, both public and private, that finance that growth. The bottom 40% of society owns about 0.3% of the wealth, or basically zero. So in an ironic twist, this whole nuclear battle that we're fighting, a nuclear disaster at San Onofre, I'm sorry. A nuclear disaster at San Onofre would convert a large portion of the wealth owned by the top 20% into worthless assets as a result of the exclusion zones created by a nuclear disaster. Much of the remaining destruction of wealth, when I say destruction of wealth, that's an irreversible, it's like the bubble bursting in the financial markets that we saw in the banking industry, would be publicly owned for infrastructure and institutions that would have to be abandoned in the event of a nuclear disaster. In other words, those who own or control land and land improvements have a tremendous financial incentive to help prevent a nuclear disaster at San Onofre. At the moment, California Congressman Darrell Issa is working hard to oust the only person on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Chairman Gregory Jaczko, who is fighting for the public safety and asset protection. Chairman Jaczko needs our support, needs to know that we are willing to fight to keep him as chairman of the NRC. The other four commissioners are more concerned with protecting the nuclear industry than they are with protecting us, the public safety, and the public assets. Here's what we can do. Please send letters to the NRC voicing your support for Chairman Jaczko and your opposition to the other four commissioners. You can do that on Monday. Also, please send letters to Darrell Issa's congressional office stating that we are watching him and will vote him out of office if he does not back off of his attacks on Chairman Jaczko, who is trying his best to regulate a virtually unregulated nuclear industry.
Vote him out anyway.
That's right.
Please start a conversation at each and every one of your cities by speaking at the public comment section of each city council meeting and bring up the issue of public safety in San Onofre. You can make a difference for the future of California by building public awareness to the point where we as a collective whole can avert a human and economic disaster that is too big to comprehend. In closing, I want to say that former Prime Minister of Japan, Naoto Kan, has joined in our chorus of opposition to nuclear power because in the early days of the Fukushima disaster, he was forced to contemplate the evacuation of Tokyo's 30 million residents. That's the largest city in the world. Based on what you just heard from Daniel Hirsch, I would say that a disaster at San Onofre, due to the amount of spent fuel stored here and the total absence of a viable evacuation plan, would be worse. Thank you.